On our Sonoran desert road trip, my son stopped the motorhome and held out papers with my house already written under his name. "Sign them, Dad. It's time to let us take care of everything," he said. I refused. His face changed, and he pointed at the door. "Then get out. This is my last warning." Minutes later, he forced me out of the motorhome and drove away, leaving me alone under the Arizona sun with no phone and no water. He thought he abandoned a helpless old man, but he forgot whose hands built everything he wanted. Thank you for being here with me. Right before we dive in, leave a comment and let me know. Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Your answer might help someone else feel less alone. Quick note: certain details here have been fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. The heart of this story, the message is what I hope stays with you. I knew from the very first second that this trip wasn't for me, but I still stepped onto that motorhome because he was my son. At 69 years old, I stood on my Tucson driveway that early November morning, watching Alonzo load the white motorhome. My calloused hands from 38 years as a city electrician rested quietly in my pockets. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, painting the Catalina Mountains copper and pink behind my small ranch house. Alonzo Cox, 40 years old, now stepped from the motorhome in designer sunglasses and a luxury watch his home repair business supposedly afforded him. He didn't look at me. "Ready for the road, son?" I asked. "Yeah, just get in, Dad. We're burning daylight." Burning daylight at 6:30 in the morning. I noticed things like that. 38 years of troubleshooting electrical systems teaches you to notice inconsistencies. A wire that doesn't match the schematic. A sun who won't meet your eyes. Nayeli Cox, my daughter-in-law, climbed from the passenger side wearing designer heels completely unsuited for desert travel. At 37, she managed a furniture store in Oro Valley, always dressed like the showroom pieces she sold. She pulled out her phone and stepped back from the motorhome. "Perfect shot of our new RV," she said to the camera. I watched her frame the photo carefully. She moved 3 steps to the left, adjusted the angle, then snapped it. The white motorhome filled her screen beautifully against the desert sunrise. I wasn't in the frame. She had deliberately stepped to exclude me, and she knew I was watching her do it. That was the first moment I understood this wasn't a father-son bonding trip, like Alonzo had proposed 2 weeks ago. This was something else. "Come on, Dad," Alonzo said without turning around. "We've got a schedule. A schedule for wandering the Sonoran desert." Another inconsistency. I climbed aboard the motorhome that would become my prison. The interior smelled new, that chemical off-gassing scent of fresh upholstery and plastic. Too new for a repair business supposedly struggling with supply chain issues. I'd heard Alonzo complain about money troubles for months, but this motorhome told a different story. I settled into the rear salon chair, the fabric stiff and unmarred. Alonzo started the engine. Nayeli slid into the passenger seat without acknowledging my existence. They both tapped at their phones as we pulled onto the empty street. The silence between us felt deliberate, practiced. I watched the back of my son's head as he drove, his shoulders rigid with tension that had nothing to do with navigating traffic. 2 hours later, we were westbound on I-10, the highway stretching empty toward Casa Grande. The morning heat already shimmered off the asphalt. I sat in that rear chair watching saguaro cacti slide past the window, each one standing alone in the rocky soil, like sentries watching travelers pass. I remembered teaching Alonzo to read circuit diagrams when he was 12. His hands had been so small, struggling to hold the wire strippers. "Like this, Dad?" he'd asked, eyes bright with concentration. "I want to work like you when I grow up." When does a father stop believing his son will come back to him? I didn't have an answer. I just kept watching the back of Alonzo's head, hoping for some sign of the boy who'd once admired calloused hands and honest work. Nayeli's phone chimed. She glanced at it and whispered something to Alonso I couldn't hear. He nodded once, sharp and quick. They were communicating in a language designed to exclude me. I'd been living with Alonso and Nayeli for 3 months since Zelda died, my wife of 42 years. They'd invited me to stay while I got back on my feet, they'd said. I should have questioned why I needed help getting back on my feet when I owned my house outright and had retirement savings. But grief makes you stupid. Loneliness makes you trusting. Alonso's phone sat in the center console cup holder, screen up. He'd been careless about that all morning, checking it every few minutes. I wasn't trying to spy. I just happened to glance down when the screen lit up with a new message. The contact name read Lawyer L. The message preview showed enough. Need signature today. Plan B if he refuses. My chest tightened. I kept my face neutral, my breathing steady. 38 years of crawling through tight attic spaces to rewire homes had taught me to stay calm when you discover something is very wrong. You don't panic. You assess. You calculate your options. Plan B if he refuses. If I refuse, what? What signature did they need from me? I thought about the papers Alonso had casually mentioned last week. Something about updating will, Dad, just in case. I'd told him I'd think about it. He'd smiled and said, no rush. But that text message said different. That text message said there was very much a rush, and there was already a contingency plan if I didn't cooperate. Alonso glanced at the phone, read the message, and typed a quick response. Got it. Tonight then. Tonight. We were supposed to be camping in the desert for 3 days. What was happening tonight? I looked at my son's profile as he drove. The sharp jawline I'd passed to him genetically. The way he chewed the inside of his cheek when he was scheming, same habit since childhood. I'd built this man from scratch, taught him right from wrong, showed him how to fix broken things and make them work again. 38 years of teaching a boy to be a man, and all I got was this view of the back of his head. I didn't ask about that text message from Lawyer L. I had learned long ago that sometimes silence is the only way to know the truth. I closed my eyes and let them think I was resting, but behind my eyelids I was calculating how much time I had left. The first stop would come at noon, and I would learn just how deep this went. The motorhome lurched into the gravel parking lot of a small gas station in Casa Grande, and I opened my eyes as if I'd been sleeping the whole time. The clock on the dashboard read noon. My neck ached from holding still in the rear chair, pretending rest, while my mind had been running calculations for the past hour. The desert heat pressed against the windows, 92 degrees, according to the temperature gauge. I could smell hot asphalt rising through the ventilation, mixing with that new motorhome chemical scent. Alonso cut the engine. Nayeli stretched in the passenger seat, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. There's a diner next door if anyone's hungry, I said. Nayeli glanced at the small building through her window. Weathered siding, hand-painted sign reading, Rita's Place. She wrinkled her nose. This place is filthy, she said. I'm not going in. I looked at my son, waiting for him to say something. Anything. The Alonso I'd raised would have, come on, it's just lunch. He would have opened the door and walked in beside his father, like he'd done 1,000 times at roadside stops during his childhood. Instead, Alonso shrugged without meeting my eyes. Yeah, Dad, we'll just wait in the AC, he said. Grab something if you want. I stood there by the motorhome door, the handle already in my hand. Nayeli was scrolling through her phone. Alonso was adjusting the air conditioning vents. Neither of them looked at me. I was dismissed, erased, standing 10 feet away from my own son and completely invisible. Zelda would have walked right into that diner and ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu. She would have talked to the owner, asked about their grandkids, made that small connection that turned strangers into neighbors for 5 minutes. She'd called every roadside stop an adventure. I stepped out into the heat alone. The diner door chimed when I entered. Cool air and the smell of coffee grounds and bacon grease washed over me. 3 booths, a counter with 5 stools, linoleum floors scrubbed clean but worn down to the pattern beneath. A man about my age, maybe 70, stood wiping down tables with methodical care. Harold Finch looked up when I walked in. I knew his name because it was stitched on his shirt pocket in faded red thread. He had weathered hands from decades of honest work, the kind of hands that knew what real labor felt like. He looked at me with the silent understanding of one working man recognizing another. "Coffee's fresh," he said. "Just made it." "Black is fine," I said. "Thank you." He poured without asking about cream or sugar. He'd already assessed me correctly. I sat at the counter while he set the cup down, the ceramic warm against my calloused palm. "Traveling through?" he asked. I nodded toward the window where the white motorhome sat gleaming in the parking lot. "A desert trip with my son," I said. Harold followed my gaze. Through the window, we could both see Alonzo and Nayeli in the air-conditioned cabin, both on their phones, both completely absorbed in screens instead of the world around them. "That's nice," Harold said, but his tone suggested he'd noticed the same thing I had, that I was sitting in here alone. When did my son learn to look through me instead of at me? I sipped the coffee. It was good, simple, honest. This is what real work looks like, I thought. Not designer sunglasses and debt disguised as success. Not luxury watches bought with money you don't have. Just clean floors and fresh coffee and weathered hands that earned every callus. Harold moved to the other end of the counter, giving me space. I appreciated that. Some people don't know when silence is the kindest thing you can offer. I sat there for 15 minutes watching my son through the window. He hadn't looked toward the diner once. Hadn't checked to see if I was okay, if I'd found food, if I was coming back. I could have collapsed in here, and he wouldn't have noticed until he was ready to leave. I left $4 on the counter for a $2 coffee and walked back into the heat. Alonzo was standing about 20 feet from the motorhome, his back to me, phone pressed against his ear. His voice carried across the parking lot, sharp and urgent despite his attempt to keep it low. "He hasn't signed yet," he was saying. "Let me handle it tonight." I froze near the diner entrance, partially hidden by the building's shadow. "I know what's at stake." Alonzo continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I said I'll handle it." A pause while whoever was on the other end responded. I watched my son's shoulders tense, watched him glance back at the motorhome to confirm Nayeli was still inside, that he was alone. "It's not going to come to that," he said. "He'll sign. He trusts me." Those 3 words hit harder than anything else. He trusts me. Said with such casual certainty, such complete confidence that his father was too stupid or too grief-broken or too lonely to see what was happening. Tonight. Whatever this signature was, whatever papers they needed me to sign, it was happening tonight. And my son was reporting to someone, updating them on his progress like this was a business transaction instead of his father's life. 38 years I taught him that a man's word means something. And here he was, whispering lies into a phone while his father stood 10 feet away. Alonzo ended the call and pocketed his phone. He stood there for a moment, his back still to me, shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath, like he was preparing himself for something. Then he turned. He saw me, and his face transformed instantly into a smile, easy and natural, the smile I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. The smile that used to mean everything was okay. "Hey, Dad," he called. "Ready to hit the road. We've got about 2 more hours to the campsite." I walked toward my son. Every step felt deliberate, measured. He was watching me approach, still smiling, performing the role of dutiful son, taking his grieving father on a healing desert journey. And I smiled back, because I was his father, and because I needed to know more. We drove for 2 more hours in silence, and by the time we pulled into the RV park near Ajo, the sun was setting over the desert hills in bands of orange and purple. The motorhome felt smaller at night, like the walls were closing in to hear every word we didn't say to each other. I'd spent that drive watching my son's reflection in the rearview mirror, seeing him check his phone every few minutes, seeing the tension in his jaw. He knew tonight was important. I knew it too, but for different reasons. The RV park was half empty, just a gravel lot, with electrical hookups and a communal bathroom building in the distance. Alonzo backed us into a spot with practiced ease and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt loud. "I'll get dinner started," I said. I'd brought supplies, the kind of simple camping food Zelda and I used to make on road trips. Canned chili cornbread mix, nothing fancy but filling and warm. I moved to the small kitchenette and started pulling things from the cabinet. Nayeli watched me from the dining booth, her face twisted in something between disgust and amusement. "I don't eat canned food," she said. "You know that." I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about what my daughter-in-law ate because in 3 months of living under the same roof, we'd barely shared a meal. She'd always been out, always busy, always somewhere else. "I'll just order something delivered," Alonzo said, already pulling out his phone. "No big deal, Dad. No big deal." My son would rather pay $30 for delivery to an RV park in the middle of nowhere than eat food his father prepared. I nodded and kept cooking, the warm LED lighting overhead, casting everything in a yellowish glow. The air conditioner hummed quietly, fighting against the desert heat still radiating through the thin walls. I ate alone at the small table while they waited for their delivery, both of them scrolling through phones, both of them acting like I wasn't there. The chili tasted like nothing. I forced myself to finish it anyway to maintain the appearance of normalcy. When I stood to clean my bowl, I noticed a cabinet above the refrigerator, slightly ajar. Inside, I could see a stack of papers, legal-sized documents with crisp edges. I moved closer, pretending to reach for a glass, and caught a glimpse of the top page. My name, Bernard Cox. And beneath it, words I couldn't fully read from this angle but caught fragments of transfer of assets and power of attorney. My chest tightened. There it was. Physical evidence of whatever they'd been planning sitting right here in the motorhome with me. Alonzo walked in from outside, at that exact moment saw where I was standing, saw the cabinet door open. His eyes flickered to the papers, then to me, then back to the papers. He reached up casually and closed the cabinet door with a soft click. "Glasses down here, Dad," he said, opening a lower cabinet and handing me one. "Thanks," I said. I memorized the location of that cabinet. Tonight, when they thought I was sleeping, I would know the truth. How does a son forget the smell of the hands that fed him? The next morning, I woke before dawn, my back aching from the narrow convertible bed they'd given me in the rear salon. Alonzo and Nayeli had taken the master bedroom with the real mattress, the door closed all night. I'd lain awake listening to their whispered conversation through the thin wall, unable to make out words, but hearing the urgent tone. Alonzo emerged around 7, already dressed, and asked me to look at something outside. One of the exterior compartment latches was sticking, he said. Would I mind checking it? Of course I wouldn't mind. I'd spent almost 4 decades fixing things. I grabbed my small toolkit from my bag and followed him outside into the rising desert sun. The latch wasn't broken. It was barely stuck. But I fixed it anyway, bending close in the growing heat, my hands getting stained with grease and dust and sweat. The morning temperature was already climbing toward 80 degrees. By the time I finished, my shirt was damp with perspiration. I walked back inside, wiping my hands on a rag. Nayeli was sitting at the dining booth with her coffee freshly showered and made up despite it being 7:30 in the morning in the middle of the desert. She looked at me as I entered, then deliberately stood and opened the large window above the sink. "Do you smell that?" she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Sweat machine oil and old age on him. I feel sorry for anyone breathing the same air. I froze. The rag was still in my hands. I could smell myself, yes. The honest smell of work, of fixing something broken, of hands that weren't afraid to get dirty. These hands had spent 38 years unafraid of dirt to raise my son. I looked at Alonzo, waiting for him to say something, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd crossed a line, to remember that these hands had held him as a baby, taught him to ride a bike, paid for every meal he'd eaten until he was 23 years old. Alonzo glanced out the window, avoiding my eyes. "Dad," he said quietly, "stop making Nayeli uncomfortable." Those 5 words landed like a physical blow. Not "Nayeli, that's enough." Not "come on, he was just helping." Not even silence, which would have been cowardly, but at least neutral. My son had chosen his wife's cruelty over his father's dignity. I looked down at my grease-stained hands and realized they had built everything my son was now trying to destroy. These hands had wired the house he grew up in, had fixed his first car, had shaken his hand at his wedding, and held him when his mother died. And now they smelled like machine oil and old age, and that was enough reason to humiliate me in public. I walked to the small rear bathroom and washed my hands under cold water. In the mirror, I saw my face and realized I wasn't sad anymore. I was only clear-headed, and when that moment came, I would be ready for everything I found. But first came the overlook. My son and I stood side by side at a scenic pullout in the Sonoran desert the next afternoon, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt like I was standing next to a stranger. The temperature had climbed to 95 degrees. Towering saguaro cacti stretched their arms toward the cloudless sky, and red rock mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels. The view was spectacular. Neither of us looked at it. Alonzo had suggested we step outside for some air, just the 2 of us. Nayeli had stayed in the motorhome with the air conditioning running. I knew this wasn't about fresh air or father-son bonding. This was the moment he'd been building toward. He began, his voice careful and measured. "I want you to know I love you. And I want a better life for our family. Our family. Not you. Not us. Our family, which apparently didn't include me anymore. I just need your help with one small thing." He continued, his tone shifting to something more urgent. "Just a signature. It's for estate planning, making sure everything's protected. You trust me, right?" I turned to face him directly. The desert sun was harsh on his face, showing lines I hadn't noticed before. Stress lines. Desperation lines. "What was that paper in the cabinet?" I asked. My son froze. Completely. His mouth was still half open from his last word. His eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second before he tried to control his expression. But I'd already seen it. That flicker of panic. That moment of being caught. He didn't answer. He didn't explain. He didn't try to deflect with a lie. He just stood there in the desert heat, and his silence told me everything I needed to know. Then he stepped back inside the motorhome without a word. For the first time on this trip, I felt genuinely afraid. We drove deeper into the desert that afternoon, heading toward a remote BLM campsite Alonzo had marked on his GPS. The landscape grew more barren, more isolated. I sat in the rear salon chair, my eyes half closed, my body still letting them think I was dozing in the heat. Nayeli spoke quietly to Alonzo, her voice low, but not quite low enough. "You have to get that signature tonight," she said. "The lawyer said Wednesday is the deadline." Wednesday. Tomorrow. The timeline was even tighter than I'd thought. "He knows about the paper," Alonzo said, his voice heavy with frustration. "Then use Plan B," Nayeli replied coldly. "You've already prepared it." Plan B. The words from that first text message. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed, my face relaxed. Through the window beside me, I caught a glimpse of a blue RV traveling in the same direction on the highway. An elderly couple was visible through the windshield, the woman smiling at something her husband had said. How long had they been planning to take everything from me? I didn't know. But I knew enough now to understand that tomorrow wasn't just a deadline for them. It was a deadline for me, too. Whatever Plan B was, it would happen soon. And I needed to be ready. We reached the campsite around sunset. It was completely undeveloped, just a flat clearing of dirt and scrub brush 40 miles from the nearest town. No other campers, no cell service, no witnesses. Alonzo made a show of checking the motorhome systems, ensuring everything was working properly. Nayeli cooked dinner on the small stove, something elaborate she'd brought in a cooler, something she actually would eat. Neither of them offered me any. I ate an apple from my bag and pretended not to notice. By 9 o'clock, they'd both retired to the master bedroom. I heard their voices through the wall, too muffled to make out words, but I caught the tone. Planning, scheming, finalizing. I lay on my narrow convertible bed and waited. The desert night was silent except for the occasional coyote call in the distance. I watched the clock on the microwave, 10 o'clock, 11 midnight 1. At 2 in the morning I stood up. The motorhome was dark and still. I could hear Alonzo's snoring from the master bedroom, that same sound he'd made since he was a teenager. I moved silently to the cabinet he'd shut so carefully, the one above the refrigerator. I opened it with practiced care, the hinges making no sound. Inside was the stack of legal documents I'd glimpsed before. I pulled them out and carried them to the rear salon, where I could use my phone's flashlight, without the glow being visible from the bedroom. The first page made my blood run cold. Deed transfer contract. My house. The home I'd paid off 15 years ago, the home where Zelda and I had raised our son, the home where she died 3 months ago. My name was pre-filled on the line marked transferor. Alonzo's name was pre-filled on the line marked transferee. Only one line was empty, my signature. The second document was for the motorhome title. Same setup. Everything prepared, everything ready, just waiting for my signature to make it legal. The third document was a power of attorney, giving Alonzo complete control over my finances, my medical decisions, my life. My son had built his entire fraudulent castle on the assumption that I was too old and too trusting to check the foundation. I carefully replaced the papers in exact order, exactly as I'd found them. I closed the cabinet door with the same silent care. Then I sat in the dark with my phone, the screen brightness turned down to almost nothing, and texted Leland Lancaster. Leland was 68, an estate planning attorney I'd known for 30 years. He'd handled Zelda's will. He knew every asset I owned. Need to see you as soon as I'm back. Urgent. I watched the screen. 2 minutes passed. Then 3. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the reply came. I'll be waiting. I turned off the flashlight and lay down in the dark. Zelda's voice echoed in my memory from years ago, something she'd said when we'd finished paying off the mortgage. We never lose what we built with our own sweat. Tomorrow would be the last day of this trip in a way my son hasn't anticipated yet. And when that last day came, everything would change in the 110-degree heat. Tomorrow came with the engine dying at exactly 7:30 in the morning, and I knew immediately it wasn't an accident. We'd been driving on a remote red dirt road deeper into the Sonoran desert, the kind of road that doesn't appear on most maps. The outdoor thermometer mounted on the motorhome dashboard already read 98 degrees, and the sun had only been up for an hour. By noon, it would hit 110. The engine sputtered once-twice, then went silent. We coasted to a stop in a landscape of sand rock and scattered creosote bushes stretching to the horizon in every direction. No other vehicles, no buildings, no cell service for at least 40 miles. Alonzo put on a perfect performance of confusion from the driver's seat. "Gee, what the hell?" he said, turning the key. "Nothing." "Dad, can you take a look? You know machinery better than I do." There it was. The line he'd been waiting to deliver. The setup. I stepped outside into the heat. It hit me like a physical wall, dry and relentless. The air smelled like dust and creosote resin, that sharp medicinal scent the desert plants release when temperatures climb. I walked to the front of this motorhome and popped the hood, the metal already hot enough to sting my palm. The engine compartment was exactly as I expected it to be. Clean, well-maintained, and with one critical problem that any first-year electrician would spot immediately. The battery cable was disconnected, not broken, not corroded, not snapped from vibration or wear, disconnected. Someone had deliberately loosened the clamp and pulled the cable free from the terminal. The connection sat there clean and intact, just separated by 2 inches of intentional space. I looked through the windshield. Alonzo and Nayeli were watching me from inside the air-conditioned cabin, both of them perfectly still waiting for my reaction. 38 years I taught him how circuits work, and he used that knowledge to trap his own father in the desert. I didn't let them know I knew. I bent down, pretending to continue inspecting, running my hands along other connections, checking hoses, playing the role they expected. The confused old man who didn't understand what had gone wrong. I took my time, feeling the heat building against my back, feeling sweat starting to soak through my shirt. When I stood up, I didn't reconnect the cable. I just closed the hood and walked back to the side door, my face carefully neutral. Battery issue. I called through the door. Might need a jump. One out here, Alonzo said, opening the door but not inviting me back inside. There's nobody for miles. The cool air from inside the motorhome spilled out past him, a sharp contrast to the furnace outside. I noticed he'd positioned himself in the doorway, blocking my entry. Nayeli sat in the passenger seat, her phone in her hand, even though there was no signal, her face showing nothing. Guess we wait, I said. Eloded checked his watch. A deliberate gesture. Theatrical. It's only going to get hotter, he said. Then he stepped fully outside, closing the door behind him. In his hand, he held a stack of papers. The papers from the cabinet. No pretense anymore. No more games. He said, his voice dropping the fake concern and taking on a businesslike tone I'd never heard him use with me before. Sign this. Transfer the house and motorhome to me. I'll pay you monthly rent. You can live there as long as you want. He held out the papers and a pen. I took them. Not because I intended to sign, but because I needed to see exactly what he'd prepared. The top document was a deed transfer contract, professionally formatted, legally binding. My house on one line, the motorhome on another. My name pre-filled as the transferor. Alonzo's name as transferee. I flipped to the second page. Asset certification. A section where the owner confirms they understand the transfer and agree to all terms. My signature was already there. Not the empty line waiting for my signature. An actual signature. My name in my handwriting, or close enough to pass a casual inspection. Forged. Already placed on the document before this trip even began. I looked up at my son. The desert sun was brutal on both of us now, but I didn't feel the heat anymore. I only felt a cold, crystalline clarity. You forged my signature, I said. Not a question, a statement. The truth. Alonzo's face drained of color. For just a moment, I saw the 12-year-old boy who'd been caught lying about breaking a neighbor's window. That same flash of panic and shame before the defenses went up. But then his jaw set hard. Just sign the final verification, he said. Nobody has to know about the other page. Sign it, and we all drive home. Refuse, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I looked at the motorhome behind him. Nayeli was visible through the window, watching us with the detached interest of someone watching a television show. The battery cable was still disconnected. We were 40 miles from help in 110-degree heat. The son I raised would never have done this. The man standing before me was someone else entirely. I'd taught him to read circuit diagrams. I'd taught him to troubleshoot electrical problems. I'd taught him that a battery cable disconnected means no power, no engine, no escape. I'd taught him everything he needed to know to trap me here. No, I said, handing the papers back. Alonzo took them, his face hardening into something I barely recognized. He looked at me with eyes that had made a calculation and reached a conclusion. Eyes that had weighed his father's life against his own financial desperation and chosen the latter. My son didn't deny it. He just looked back at me with the eyes of a man who has made his choice and cannot turn back. And I knew with absolute certainty what would happen next. I looked at the papers in my son's trembling hands and said the only word that mattered: no. The word hung in the desert air between us, simple and final. Around us, the temperature was climbing past 100 degrees. Heat waves shimmered off the red dirt road, distorting the horizon into liquid mirages. The smell of creosote was overwhelming now that sharp, resinous scent plants release when they're being cooked alive. Alonzo's face changed. The careful businessman mask cracked completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "You don't understand." His voice cracked, climbing toward panic. "You always thought everything belonged to you. You don't understand real life. I need money. I need help. You just sit there with your savings while I'm dying." He was shouting now, spittle flying, his designer sunglasses sliding down his sweat-slicked face. This wasn't the cold, calculated criminal from the Overlook yesterday. This was a drowning man watching his last lifeline slip away. "I worked for everything I have," I said quietly. "You could have asked for help. You didn't have to forge my signature." "Asked?" Alonzo laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You would have said no. You would have given me a lecture about living within my means and honest work and all that nonsense that doesn't pay bills when you're 40 and failing." He stepped toward me, his hand reaching for my arm, and I saw it in his eyes before it happened. The calculation, the decision, the point where desperation crosses into something darker. He shoved me, hard. I stumbled backward off the motorhome steps, my 69-year-old body not as quick to catch balance as it used to be. My shoulder hit the ground first, then my hip sending shock waves of pain through joints that had already logged too many hours, crawling through attics and climbing poles. The red dirt was sharp and hot against my palms. Alonzo stood in the motorhome doorway looking down at me. Behind him, Nayeli appeared, her face completely impassive. She reached past my son and pulled the door closed with a decisive click. I heard the lock engage from inside. This was the son I had held in my arms the day he was born, and he was leaving me to die. I pushed myself to my feet, dust and grit clinging to my sweat-damp shirt. Through the motorhome window, I could see Alonzo climbing back into the driver's seat. Nayeli was already settled in the passenger side, her phone in her hand, not looking at me. The engine roared to life, just like that. No grinding starter, no struggling battery. The motor turned over smooth and strong because the battery cable had been reconnected, probably while I was on the ground. Or maybe Nayeli had done it from inside while Alonzo kept me distracted with his performance of desperation. It had all been planned. Every second. The fake breakdown, the confrontation, the shove, the quick reconnection, the escape. Plan B executed with the precision of people who'd rehearsed it. I didn't shout my son's name. I didn't chase the motorhome or pound on the windows. I just stood there on the red dirt road, watching it roll forward, picking up speed, raising a plume of dust behind it. My phone was inside. My wallet, my water bottle, my medication. Everything except the clothes I was wearing and the desert stretching endless in every direction under a sun that was just getting started with the day's heat. The motorhome reached the bend in the road about a quarter-mile ahead. I watched it disappear behind a rocky outcrop covered in barrel cactus and ocotillo. The sound of the engine faded. Then there was only silence. Desert silence is different from other silences. It's not peaceful. It's waiting. It's the sound of heat and time and creatures hiding from both, waiting for night when the world becomes survivable again. I turned in a slow circle, taking inventory. The road stretched behind me the way we'd come maybe 8 miles back to where it intersected with a slightly larger dirt road that might eventually lead to pavement. Ahead, the direction the motorhome had gone, the road continued into deeper desert wilderness. No buildings, no vehicles, no water sources visible, no shade except for the sparse shadows cast by creosote bushes and the occasional stunted palo verde tree. The temperature gauge on my watch read 104 degrees. It would hit 110 by noon. A man my age could last maybe 3 hours in this heat without water. Less if I tried to walk. The human body is 90% water, and the desert doesn't care about percentages. I looked at my hands. Calloused palms from 38 years of stripping wire climbing poles, troubleshooting circuits in attics that hit 130 degrees in summer. These hands had survived worse heat than this. They'd just never done it without water. The desert had swallowed my son whole, and I was left with only the truth and the heat. But here's what Alonzo didn't know about his father. The humble city electrician he'd dismissed as too old and too trusting and too stupid to see betrayal coming. I'd spent 5 decades working outdoors in Arizona summers. I'd survived heat exhaustion twice, dehydration once, and a severed power line that should have killed me but didn't. I'd learned which plants stored water, which shadows stayed cool longest, how to ration sweat and conserve movement, and read the angle of sun to know how many hours until dark. I'd taught my son to read circuit diagrams, but I'd never taught him the things you learn from necessity. The things you learn when your survival depends on understanding the world instead of just using it. The motorhome disappeared behind the bend. I looked down at my hands. No phone, no water, no shade, just the calloused palms from 38 years of honest work. And I thought, all right, because a man who survives 5 decades of Arizona summers knows a few things about staying alive. I started walking, not because I had hope, but because 38 years as an electrician had taught me how to survive Arizona summers. The first rule: don't walk in direct sunlight. I moved from shadow to shadow, following the narrow strips of shade cast by saguaro cacti and ironwood trees. The shadows were small at 8:30 in the morning, but they were cooler than the open road by at least 15 degrees. Every degree mattered. The second rule: breathe through your nose, not your mouth. Mouth breathing in desert heat dries you out twice as fast. I kept my breathing slow and controlled the way I'd learned from decades of working on utility poles in summer, when every breath felt like inhaling from an oven. The third rule: look for water signs. Not actual water, which was impossible out here, but arroyos, those dry washes where flash floods carved channels through the desert. Groundwater often ran close to the surface in arroyos. If I could find one deep enough, it might provide shade and slightly cooler temperatures. I walked slowly, deliberately, conserving every ounce of energy. My watch showed the temperature climbing 100 degrees, 102, 104. But I'd worked in attics that hit 130. I knew how to move in heat. I knew how to survive. My son thought he was leaving a week-old man to die, but he forgot what those 38 years had taught me. After about 40 minutes, I found what I was looking for: a piece of reflective aluminum sheeting from an old roadside sign half buried in the dirt near a creosote bush. It was maybe 2 feet square, dented and rusted, but still reflective. I used it to shield the back of my neck from direct sun, angling it to deflect the worst rays. Another trick from working utility poles where we'd use anything reflective to bounce heat away from our bodies. I kept walking. The road stretched ahead, wavering in heat mirages that made the horizon look like it was melting. Behind me, my footprints marked the red dirt in a long trail away from the spot where my son had abandoned me. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. A lizard darted across the road, moving so fast it was almost a blur. Smart creature. It understood the desert's rhythm: move quickly from shade to shade, minimize exposure, survive until night when the world becomes survivable again. I'd covered maybe 3 miles by 10:30. My lips were cracked. My tongue felt thick. The early signs of dehydration were setting in: that dry, cottony sensation in your mouth, the slight dizziness that comes before things get serious. I had maybe another hour, maybe less, before I'd need to stop walking and focus purely on finding shade to wait out the midday heat. Then I heard it, an engine. I turned. Coming from the direction I'd walked, raising a plume of dust behind it, was a blue RV. The same blue RV I'd seen through the motorhome window yesterday, traveling in the same direction on the highway. It slowed as it approached, then stopped beside me. The door opened, and a man stepped out, maybe 68, with weathered features and eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize trouble when they found it. Thaddeus Greer, I would learn later, was a retired police officer from Oregon. He took one look at me standing there with my makeshift aluminum sun shield and my dust-caked clothes, and immediately understood the situation. "You all right?" he asked, already reaching back inside the RV for a bottle of water. "How long have you been out here?" "2 hours," I said, my voice coming out rough and cracked. "Since 8:30? A woman appeared behind him in the doorway. Marie Greer, 66. A retired teacher with kind eyes that showed genuine concern. She handed me the water bottle Thaddeus had grabbed, and I forced myself to sip slowly instead of gulping. "Come inside," Marie said, taking my elbow and guiding me up the steps. "Air conditioning? Sit down. We have food." The blast of cool air felt like salvation. I sat on their small couch while Marie pressed a cold cloth against the back of my neck, and Thaddeus brought me crackers and an energy bar. "What happened?" Thaddeus asked. His voice had that cop quality, gentle but direct, asking questions that needed asking. I told them. Not everything, not yet, but enough. The trip with my son, the forged documents, the confrontation, the shove, the motorhome driving away. Marie's hand tightened on my shoulder. "You survived," she said quietly. "Now it's time to fight." Thaddeus pulled out his phone, his face set in hard lines. "This is elder abandonment," he said. "A felony in Arizona. Leaving a vulnerable adult in life-threatening conditions with intent to harm or defraud. You need to report this." "He's my son," I said. For the first time in hours, I felt something other than heat. I felt hope. "That makes it worse," Thaddeus replied. "Not better. Under Arizona law, family relationship is an aggravating factor, increases penalties." He was already dialing. "I'm calling the Pima County Sheriff. We're about 40 miles from Ajo. There's a substation there. We'll drive you, and Marie and I will serve as witnesses." He paused, phone at his ear, looking at me with eyes that had probably looked at hundreds of crime victims over a 30-year career. "Do you know who did this?" he asked, though we both knew he was asking for the official record. "Can you identify them?" "Yes," I said. "It was my son, Alonzo Cox, and his wife, Nayeli." Thaddeus nodded and spoke into the phone, giving the dispatcher details: location, condition of victim, nature of crime, request for immediate response, and medical evaluation. I sat in the cool air of the blue RV, drinking water in small, careful sips, watching the desert through the window. The same desert that should have killed me. The same desert my son had counted on. Thaddeus picked up his phone again after the first call ended, already dialing the next number. I sat watching the desert through the window of the blue RV and thought my son chose the wrong person to leave in the desert, because now the law was coming for him. The blue RV pulled into the parking lot of a small county sheriff's substation near Ajo 40 minutes later. The building had peeling paint and a single flagpole, but it was the first step toward justice. Thaddeus held the door open as I walked inside, Marie's hand steady on my elbow. The reception area was small, just a few plastic chairs and an old wooden desk with fluorescent lighting buzzing overhead. The air conditioning was running, but barely keeping up with the afternoon heat. Deputy Marcus Vaughn was young, maybe late 20s, with the careful attention to detail of someone who took his job seriously. He sat across from me at the desk, a legal pad in front of him, pen ready. "Start from the beginning," he said. "When did this happen?" I told him everything. The trip invitation, the legal papers in the cabinet, the engine stopping at 7:30 this morning, the forged signature, my refusal, the shove, the motorhome driving away, leaving me without water or phone in 110-degree heat. Thaddeus and Marie sat beside me, adding their testimony. They'd found me at 10:30, 2 hours after the abandonment. I'd been walking in direct desert heat. Another hour and I would have been in serious danger, maybe dead. Deputy Vaughn wrote everything down, his face growing more serious with each sentence. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Shotse, Mr. Cox. What you're describing falls under Arizona Revised Statute 13-3623, he said. "Vulnerable adult abuse. Your son abandoned you in life-threatening conditions with apparent intent to cause harm or facilitate fraud. That's a Class 2 felony." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. 3 to 12 years in prison, Vaughn said. "Possibly more with aggravating factors like family relationship and premeditation. I'll be contacting Arizona Adult Protective Services within 24 hours. They'll investigate. Based on your statement and witness testimony, there's probable cause for an arrest warrant." I sat with my hands resting on the desk. No trembling, no anger visible on my face. Just calm certainty about what needed to happen next. "I understand," I said. "But I'm not done." The young deputy looked at me like he expected me to break down, but I had spent the last 12 hours surviving. I wasn't about to fall apart now. Vaughn nodded slowly. "We'll need to document your injuries. Dehydration, heat exposure, the shoulder from when he pushed you. Do you need medical attention?" "I'll see my own doctor tomorrow," I said. "Right now, I just want to go home." Thaddeus drove me all the way to Tucson, 3 hours through the desert as the sun set behind us. Marie sat in the back with me, not talking much, just being present. When we pulled into my driveway at 11 o'clock that night, she gave me her phone number written on a small card. "You call if you need anything," she said. "Witnesses, testimony, someone to talk to. Anything. We'll testify," Thaddeus added. "Court deposition, whatever's needed. Your son left you to die. That matters." I thanked them and watched their blue RV pull away into the night. Then I stood in my driveway, looking at my house. It looked exactly the same as when I'd left 4 days ago, but everything felt different. Inside, the air was stale and warm. I turned on lights, adjusted. The thermostat moved through familiar rooms that suddenly felt like they belonged to a different version of my life. The version before my son tried to kill me. I stopped in front of the wall where Zelda's photograph hung. It was my favorite picture of her, taken on our 30th anniversary. She was laughing at something I'd said, her eyes bright with joy and mischief. I spoke aloud for the first time since Thaddeus had dropped me off. "Dearest," I said to the photograph, "our son left me in the desert." The words sounded impossible even as I said them, but they were true. They had happened. And now I had to decide what to do with that truth. I sat at my desk and took out a blank piece of paper. Started making a list in careful handwriting. Call Leland. Contact lawyer about fraud. Check bank accounts. Review asset documentation. Protect the house. My phone buzzed. A text message from Leland Lancaster. I checked the records like you asked before the trip. It's serious? Meet me tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. my house. I stared at the message pieces locking together in my mind. Before the trip. I'd asked Leland to investigate before I'd even left. Some part of me had known something was wrong. Some instinct had told me to prepare. My son had tried to bury me in the desert, but he'd forgotten that I knew how to dig foundations. I texted back, "I'll be there." Then I sat in my quiet house surrounded by 40 years of memories and thought about Zelda. She'd always been the smart one, the one who saw patterns before I did. When Alonzo had first started showing signs of financial trouble 6 months ago, she'd been the one who suggested we review our estate planning, make sure everything was protected. She'd died before we could finish that conversation, but she'd planted the seed. She'd made me think about protection, about documentation, about what happens when the people you trust might not be trustworthy. We never lose what we build with our own sweat, she used to say. It was her favorite line, something her father had told her growing up in a family of construction workers. I looked at her photograph one last time before turning off the lamp. She always said, "We never lose what we build with our own sweat." Tonight I understood how right she was. My son had tried to take everything. The house I'd paid off with 38 years of electrical work. The motorhome we'd bought to see the country in retirement. My dignity. My life. But he'd forgotten something important. I'd built all of it with my own hands. And what I built, I knew how to defend. And tomorrow morning, I would learn exactly how much my son had tried to steal. Morning came with Leland's kitchen table covered in files before I even sat down. And I knew the news would be worse than I'd imagined. Leland Lancaster had been my friend for 30 years. At 68, he'd handled Zelda's will and helped me with estate planning when we'd paid off the house. He knew every asset I owned, every dollar I'd saved, every document that bore my signature. He also knew what my signature actually looked like. 2 cups of black coffee sat on the table, both already cold. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating thick file folders arranged in careful rows. Leland looked like he hadn't slept. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a while." He spread the first document in front of me. A loan contract from a private financial firm in Phoenix. $80,000. My name on the borrower line, my signature at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close. Very close. Someone had practiced. But the angle of my B was wrong, and the loop in my X was too tight. I'd been signing my name for 69 years. I knew every curve. "That's not mine," I said. Leland nodded grimly and laid out the second document. A personal guarantee for business debt. $120,000. Alonzo's company listed as the primary borrower, my name as the guarantor. Same forged signature. "Jesus," I whispered. The third document was a power of attorney form, granting Alonzo access to my credit information and the authority to act on my behalf in financial matters. Another forgery. Leland pulled out a blank sheet of paper and started drawing a diagram with me at the center. Lines radiated out to 4 different creditors, dates and dollar amounts written along each line. All the debts were maturing within the next 30 days. All of them listed me as guarantor or co-borrower. 3 separate documents. Leland said, his voice tight with controlled anger. 3 counts of federal identity fraud. 15 years each if prosecuted federally. Your son told these creditors you would stand as guarantor without your knowledge or consent. I stared at the diagram. My name at the center of a tangled web of debt I'd never agreed to, never signed for, never knew existed until this moment. He used my name as a financial shield, I said. The words came out flat, emotionless. Without my knowledge. My son had built an entire house of cards on the foundation of my name, and now I was pulling out the bottom card. "Can you help me find more?" Leland asked. "Because if this is his pattern, there might be other documents out there we haven't found yet." "I already have," I said, thinking of the deed transfer papers in the motorhome cabinet. "There's more." We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Leland made copies, organized files, created a timeline. By the time I left his house at noon, I had a folder 2 inches thick documenting systematic fraud, spanning at least 8 months. I drove home in silence, stopped at a red light on Grant Road, and watched normal people living normal lives, going to work, running errands, not dealing with the fact that their son had tried to financially destroy them before leaving them to die in the desert. Back at my house, I sat in the living room with all the lights off. Just me and Zelda's photograph and the weight of what I now knew. My phone buzzed at 3 o'clock. Alonzo's name on the screen. I answered without saying hello. "Dad." His voice was tight, strained. "I know yesterday was messy, but you need to understand the pressure I'm under. You just live in your bubble. You don't know what real life is. I need you to sign those papers." No apology. No acknowledgement that he'd shoved me to the ground and driven away. Just justification and demands. I listened in complete silence, letting him exhaust himself with explanations about business pressures and financial realities and how I didn't understand modern economics. When he finally stopped talking, I asked a single calm question. "Do you know what Arizona ARS 133623 is?" 4 seconds of silence. 4 seconds can feel like an eternity when your son realizes he's facing prison. "What?" Alonzo's voice had changed. The confidence was gone. Arizona Revised Statute 133623. I said, my voice steady and clear. "Elder abandonment. Leaving a vulnerable adult in life-threatening conditions. Class 2 felony. 3 to 12 years in prison. You committed it against me yesterday morning when you pushed me out of the motorhome and drove away in 110-degree heat." Silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing fast and shallow. "I filed a police report," I continued. "Deputy Marcus Vaughn at the Pima County Sheriff. Case number 20-25-40392. I had witnesses. Thaddeus and Marie Greer, the couple who found me 2 hours after you left me to die. They're willing to testify." "Dad, wait. And I also know about the forged signatures," I said, cutting him off. "The $80,000 loan, the guarantee for your business debt, the power of attorney. 3 separate counts of federal identity fraud. 15 years each." I could hear something crash in the background on his end. A chair, a lamp, something thrown in panic. "You need to listen," Alonzo started. "No, Kai," I said. "I'm done listening. I'm done being patient. I'm done waiting for you to become the man I raised you to be. You left me in the desert to die so you could steal my house. That's who you are now." I hung up. The phone started ringing again immediately. I turned it off. I sat in the quiet living room, warm evening sunlight slanting through the windows, and thought about everything that would happen next. Alonzo would panic. He'd call Nayeli. They'd strategize. They'd hire a lawyer, probably the same one who'd helped him draft those forged documents. I put the phone down, knowing that from this second on my son is calling a lawyer. And I am calling mine too. But mine had something his would never have: the truth. I called Thornton Kelly that evening, and for the first time in 15 years, I was about to tell someone the truth about the money. Thornton's office was compact, but warm, with soft lighting and thick files stacked on an old oak desk. At 58, he'd been handling my private legal matters since Zelda and I had set up our first will. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. He sat across from me now, a fresh legal pad in front of him, reading glasses perched on his nose. Leland sent me copies of the forged documents, Thornton said. 3 counts of identity fraud. The elder abandonment charge. Your son is facing serious prison time. I know, I said. But there's something else. Something I need to tell you before we proceed. Thornton set down his pen and looked at me directly. I'm listening. I took a breath. This secret had lived inside me for 15 years, shared with no one except Zelda. Not my son, not my friends, no one. During the last 15 years of my career as an electrician, I worked on 3 major solar energy installation projects across Arizona. Commercial scale, the kind that power entire neighborhoods. Thornton nodded, waiting. The companies that built those projects were struggling. I continued. This was 2010 to 2015 before solar became profitable. Nobody wanted renewable energy stock. It was considered a joke, a waste of money. The share prices were rock bottom. I could see Thornton starting to understand where this was going. Now, I bought shares, I said, quietly, a little bit from each paycheck. Zelda and I lived simply. We didn't need much. Every month I put money into those 3 companies. When my co-workers were buying new trucks, I was buying solar stock that everyone said was worthless. I had spent 15 years building a fortune in silence, while my son assumed I had nothing. How much? Thornton asked quietly. The current portfolio value is $3.2 million, I said. Thornton's pen stopped moving. He looked at me for a long moment, then wrote the number down carefully. Does your son know? He asked. No, I said. Nobody knows except you and Leland now. Zelda knew, obviously. She was the one who encouraged me to keep it quiet. She said our son needed to learn to stand on his own feet, not wait for an inheritance. Before I explain what that fortune really means for this case, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think I was right to keep the secret, or B, if I should have told my son earlier. Add your reason in just 5 to 10 words. Please note what follows includes some adapted details for storytelling clarity, but the lesson is real. Thornton leaned back in his chair, processing the information. All the assets are held under an LLC. I continued. Completely controlled by me. Alonzo has 0 legal rights to any of it. The fraudulent documents he signed, the guarantees, the power of attorney, they're all legally void because he's not a co-owner of any assets. He tried to steal a house I own free and clear, and wealth he didn't even know existed. This changes everything, Thornton said. Your son thought he was defrauding a poor retired electrician living on a modest pension. He had no idea you're a multimillionaire with complete legal protection. The irony wasn't lost on me. Alonzo had spent months planning to steal everything from a father he thought was vulnerable and financially weak. He'd never considered that the humble electrician might have been smarter with money than the son with the business degree. What do you want to do with all this information? Thornton asked. I thought about that question for a long moment. What did I want? Revenge, justice, reconciliation. I want my son to face consequences for what he did, I said finally. But I also want to protect what Zelda and I built. The solar portfolio, the house, everything. I want it secured so he can never touch it. And the criminal charges, let them proceed, I said. I didn't file those reports to bargain. I filed them because they're true. Thornton nodded and made notes. I'll draft documentation protecting all assets. We'll also prepare a comprehensive response to any civil claims Alonzo might file. I left his office at 8 o'clock that night with a plan. For the first time since the motorhome had driven away and left me in the desert, I felt like I had solid ground under my feet. The next morning, I was sitting on my front porch drinking coffee when my phone buzzed. Nayeli's name on the screen. I answered, Mr. Cox. Her voice was entirely different from the trip. No arrogance, no cruelty, just stress. I need to talk to you privately. Alonzo says you're planning to sue, and that will affect me too. I said nothing, just listened. I didn't know Alonzo forged your signature. She said the words, tumbling out fast. He told me you'd agreed to everything. He said you wanted to help with the business. I believed him. Still, I stayed silent. Did you sign any documents related to my assets? I asked finally. Her voice trembled. Yes. Once. He said it was routine bank procedure. Something about verifying family relationships for estate planning. I signed as a witness. My son had played chess with people as pieces, and he'd just realized the queen he thought was his belonged to the other player. What did the document say? I asked. I don't know, Nayeli said, and I believed her. Alonzo put a sticky note over everything except the signature line. He said it was confidential financial information. I trusted him. She'd signed a legal document without reading it, because her husband told her to. And now she was legally complicit in fraud without even understanding what she'd done. You need your own lawyer, I said. Not Alonzo's lawyer, your own. Do you understand? Silence on the other end. Then a quiet, yes. I listened to my daughter-in-law's voice and realized one thing: my son didn't just betray his father. He betrayed the wife he used as a tool, and she was about to discover just how deep the betrayal went. 2 days after Nayeli's call, my doorbell rang at 9 in the morning. Tamara didn't just bring a laptop. She brought the truth I couldn't see. Tamara Judd was 35, my granddaughter, through my late sister's family line, and a forensic accountant who worked for a firm in Phoenix specializing in financial fraud investigations. She'd heard about the desert abandonment through family channels and driven straight to Tucson without calling first. Grandpa Bernard, she said. When I opened the door, her laptop bag already slung over her shoulder. I'm here to help you organize evidence. This is what I do professionally. I'd seen Tamara maybe twice a year at family gatherings, always polite but distant the way younger generations can be. I'd never imagined I'd need her professional skills against my own son. We sat at my kitchen table and I spread out everything: Leland's files on the forged loan documents, the deed transfer papers from the motorhome. The power of attorney forms the sheriff's report from the abandonment. Tamara opened her laptop and started scanning documents with a small portable scanner, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I'm building a timeline, she explained. Cross-referencing dates, signature patterns, document types. Looking for the full scope. She worked in silence for 20 minutes, occasionally making small sounds of recognition or concern. Then she stopped, her hands hovering over the keyboard. Grandpa, she said quietly. When did you last see the motorhome title? I don't know, I said. Maybe a year ago. It was in my file cabinet. Can you get it? I went to my home office and pulled the file. Except the title wasn't there. Just an empty folder labeled Motorhome 2019 Winnebago. It's gone, I said, bringing the empty folder back to the kitchen. Tamara nodded like she'd expected that. I found a digital record, she said, turning her laptop screen toward me. DMV transfer database. Your motorhome title was transferred to Alonzo's name on March 15, 2025, 8 months ago. Your signature is on file, March. 3 months before the desert trip. 3 months before the desert trip that Alonzo had used as the excuse to suggest we needed to move assets around. The motorhome had been fraudulently transferred long before any of the confrontation. This wasn't a desperate act. This was premeditated theft executed in stages over months. What's the value? I asked, though I already knew. DMV lists it at $89,000. Tamara said. She was watching me carefully, her hands shaking slightly, as she cross-referenced another date. This is the fourth forged signature I've found. Grandpa, when does betrayal stop being personal and become criminal? I didn't have an answer. I just sat there looking at the screen at my son's name where mine used to be at the forged signature that looked close enough to mine to fool a DMV clerk, but not close enough to fool my granddaughter's forensic software. We need to file a comprehensive report, Tamara said. Not just the sheriff, Arizona Adult Protective Services. They coordinate with FBI financial crimes when fraud exceeds $50,000. With 4 forged signatures totaling over $200,000, plus the elder abandonment, this triggers federal jurisdiction. How long will that take? I asked. We can do it today, she said. I'll help you compile everything. We spent the next 3 hours building the report. Tamara organized it like a legal brief timeline, evidence summary, witness statements, forensic analysis. 47 pages by the time we finished with attachments, including scanned documents, the sheriff's report medical records from my dehydration treatment, and photographs of the forged signatures compared to my actual signature. At 2 o'clock, we drove to the APS office on Congress Street in downtown Tucson. The building was plain concrete and glass government-issue architecture that prioritized function over form. Inside, we were directed to an investigator's office on the 3rd floor. The investigator was a woman in her 40s who'd clearly seen every variation of family financial abuse. She read our report in silence, occasionally making notes, her face showing no emotion. "This is well documented," she said finally. "We'll open an immediate investigation. I'm required to notify law enforcement within 24 hours when fraud exceeds $50,000 involving a vulnerable adult." "I'm not vulnerable," I said automatically. "You're over 65, and you were abandoned in life-threatening conditions by a family member," she replied. "Under Arizona law, that makes you a vulnerable adult regardless of your actual capabilities. It's not an insult. It's a legal protection." She made a phone call while we sat there speaking in the shorthand of law enforcement coordination. When she hung up, she looked at me directly. I need to tell you something," she said. "Your case was already flagged in our system 6 weeks ago. An anonymous tip from a bank employee who noticed suspicious signature patterns on loan documents. We were building a file when you walked in today. 6 weeks. Someone had seen the fraud and reported it before I'd even gone on the desert trip. Before I'd known anything was wrong. FBI Financial Crimes Unit will contact your son within 48 hours, she continued. Probably sooner given the severity. Do you have somewhere safe to stay if you're concerned about retaliation? I'll be fine, I said, walking out of the APS office into the December afternoon sunlight. I thought about that question. Was I scared? Should I be? My son had forged my signature 4 times. Had stolen over $200,000 in my name. Had left me to die in the desert. Had used his wife as an unwitting accomplice. Had planned all of it for at least 8 months, maybe longer. I remembered his voice from March, casual and friendly. "Don't worry about the motorhome, Dad. I'll handle the paperwork." A confession disguised as reassurance. Tamara walked beside me to the car, quiet and steady. She'd given me the truth I couldn't see, organized it into 47 pages of undeniable evidence, and transformed my sadness into something the law could act on. I'd never been scared, just sad. And sadness is not fear. 3 days after filing the APS report, fear tried to find me. But I'd lived through worse than waiting, and sadness had long ago taught me patience. The phone rang at 7:04 in the morning, Alonzo's number flashing on the screen for the first time since I'd hung up on him a week ago. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" His voice was high and tight, stripped of all pretense. "FBI is calling my office about forged documents. They want to interview me about fraud and elder abandonment. I said nothing, just held the phone and listened to my son panic. Dad, are you there? Did you hear me? The FBI. I heard you, I said calmly. What did you tell them? What did you do? I reported the truth, I said. You forged my signature 4 times. You left me in the desert to die. Those are facts, not accusations. Yeah, this is insane, Alonzo's voice cracked. You're sending your own son to prison over a truck over some paperwork. The FBI had moved faster than even Tamara expected. 72 hours from APS filing to federal investigation. The system, when it wanted to, could move like lightning. Not over a truck, I said. Over systematic fraud totaling over $200,000. Over abandoning your 69-year-old father in 110-degree heat without water. Over 8 months of premeditated theft. I was trying to save the business. I was trying to provide for my family. By stealing from yours, I said. By forging documents. By using your wife as an unwitting accomplice. By planning my death. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone with a defense, but the silence of someone realizing the trap has already closed. To the Motorhome title, I continued. March 15th, 3 months before you suggested the desert trip. You'd already stolen it. The whole thing was planned. I could hear Alonzo breathing fast and shallow. I need you to call them back, he said, desperation bleeding through every word. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me permission. Tell them, no, I said. Dad, please, I'm your son. Yes, I said. You are. And I taught you right from wrong. I taught you that actions have consequences. I taught you to be a man of integrity. You chose to ignore all of it. I hung up. When your son asks if you're sending him to prison, do you feel guilt or relief? I'd expected guilt. I'd prepared myself for the weight of that guilt, the knowledge that my testimony would put my own child behind bars. But all I felt was a quiet, settled calm. I'd reported the truth. The consequences were his, not mine. 2 days later, I was sitting on my front porch reading the morning paper when my phone buzzed with a text message. Nayeli. I have left. Hired private lawyer to split assets. Sorry for what I said on the trip. I read it twice. Short, direct. No explanation beyond the bare facts. She'd made her choice. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Cox. This is Jennifer Morrison, attorney representing Nayeli Cox in her dissolution proceedings. I'm calling to discuss asset division and need to ask about some property items. What items? I asked. Your daughter-in-law's initial asset schedule lists household furniture, appliances, electronics. Standard marital property. But when we contacted the home address, the landlord says the house was vacated 3 weeks ago. The furniture is gone. I sat up straighter in my chair. Gone where? That's what I'm trying to determine. Mrs. Cox believed these items would be split in the divorce settlement. Do you know anything about their location? Well, no, I said honestly. I haven't been to their house since before the desert trip. Ms. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Mr. Cox, I need to ask this directly. Is it possible your son sold or pawned marital assets without your daughter-in-law's knowledge? It's not just possible, I said. It's consistent with everything else he's done. Another pause. I see. Would you be willing to provide a statement to that effect? Yes, I said. She thanked me and hung up. I sat there on the porch, watching December clouds drift across the desert sky. An hour later, Ms. Morrison called back. Mr. Cox, your daughter-in-law's asset schedule shows nothing. Her professional composure had cracked slightly. The furniture, the appliances, the wedding gifts, all pawned over the past 6 months at 3 different shops under Alonzo's business name. Total liquidation value about $12,000. 6 months. He'd been selling everything long before the desert trip. Long before I'd discovered the forged signatures. He'd been systematically stripping assets from every source he could access, burning bridges behind him, like a man who knew the end was coming. Nayeli thought she'd married a man with assets. She'd married a man who sold everything, including loyalty. What happens now? I asked. Now my client learns she's leaving a marriage with nothing except debt and potential criminal liability for documents she signed without reading, Ms. Morrison said quietly. She gambled on the wrong man. After the call ended, I sat on the porch for a long time. The December sun climbed higher, warming the air to a comfortable 70 degrees. Tucson winters are gentle, forgiving. Nothing like the brutal summers that test everything they touch. Alonzo was panicking. Nayeli was leaving empty-handed. The FBI was investigating. The DA would file formal charges soon. The dominoes were falling one after another, and I hadn't pushed them. I just stopped holding them upright. I thought about water in the desert, how it moves. Not fast like a river, but slow and patient. It finds cracks in rock, seeps into foundations, works its way through stone over years and decades. And then one day the dam breaks and everything floods at once. Sometimes justice arrives like water, quiet, patient, flooding everything. A week after that water metaphor settled into my bones, the flood arrived at my doorstep in the form of my broken son. The knock came soft. Not the pounding of a confident man, but the hesitation of someone learning to ask instead of demand. I looked through the peephole. Alonzo stood on my porch in wrinkled clothes, unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Probably hadn't. I opened the door. He said, "Can I come in?" I looked at my son, 40 years old, the boy I'd taught to read circuit diagrams, the teenager I'd helped through calculus homework, the young man I'd watched marry Nayeli with such hope in his eyes. And now this, a fraud suspect, a man who'd left his father to die. "Come in," I said. Then after a pause, "Not because you're forgiven, because you're still my son." He stepped inside like a stranger entering unfamiliar territory. We walked to the living room, and I gestured to the couch. He sat. I took the chair across from him, the same chair I'd sat in 1,000 times talking to Zelda about our day, our plans, our son. "Handa?" Nayeli left. Alonzo said, his voice raw. "Took everything she could carry. Her lawyer found out about the furniture, the appliances, everything I had to sell. She says I used her." He wasn't wrong. "Whose FBI wants me in Phoenix next week," he continued. "Formal interview. My lawyer says they're building a case for multiple felony counts. I don't know what to do." I said nothing, just watched my son fall apart in my living room. "I'm losing everything," Alonzo whispered. "My wife, my business, my freedom, everything." Forgiveness isn't opening the door. It's recognizing the man who knocks is already punished. "Did you come here for sympathy?" I asked. "Or to ask me to drop the charges?" "I don't know," he said honestly. I didn't know where else to go." I leaned back in my chair, studying my son's face. When had he become this person? When had the shift happened, from the boy who wanted to work like his dad to the man who would forge his father's signature 4 times? "I need to tell you something," I said. "About your mother." Alonzo looked up, confusion crossing his exhausted features. 15 years ago, I started buying stock," I said. "Solar energy companies, Arizona solar installations. When nobody wanted it. When everyone said renewable energy was a joke." I watched his face, waiting for recognition. "Well, you mocked me for it," I continued. "You said I was wasting money on hippie nonsense. Do you remember?" He nodded slowly. I kept buying anyway, small amounts every month. Your mother and I lived simply. We didn't need much. Every paycheck, a little more stock. For 15 years. Why are you telling me this? Alonzo asked. And because that portfolio is now worth over $3 million, I said. And your mother knew about every share. The color drained from his face. 7 years ago, your mother sat at this table and told me something, I said. She said, our son doesn't need our money. He needs to stand on his own feet. Alonzo was staring at me like I was speaking a foreign language. She told me to set up a will. I continued. Create a scholarship fund for Arizona students studying electrical engineering. Focus on sustainable energy. Name it after her. Leave the house to charity if I wanted, but not to give you the money. She knew. Alonzo's voice broke. All that time she knew you had. She knew the man you were becoming, I said. And she loved you anyway. But she wouldn't enable it. She said you'd been changing for years, getting harder, more focused on money than people, more willing to cut corners. Tears were running down my son's face now. She saw it 7 years ago, I said. Long before you forged anything. Long before the desert. She knew her son no longer needed us. He needed to fall and learn to stand back up. Zelda built a fortress around our money, not to punish her son, but to save the boy he used to be from the man he became. And I thought, Alonzo's voice was barely audible, I thought if I could just get access to your assets, I could save the business. Start over. I thought you were just sitting on money you didn't need while I was drowning. I was sitting on money I'd earned, I corrected gently. Money your mother and I chose to dedicate to helping strangers' children get educations. That was our choice, our money, our legacy. She really knew, Alonzo whispered more to himself than to me. All those years. She knew He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say aloud what his mother had seen. That her son had become someone willing to steal, willing to betray, willing to leave his father to die for money that didn't exist. Why didn't she tell me? Alonzo asked, his voice breaking completely. Why didn't she stop me? She tried, I said. In her way. She encouraged you to focus on honest work. She refused to loan you money when your business struggled. She told you repeatedly that wealth built on debt wasn't wealth at all. I didn't listen. No, I agreed. You didn't. My son's shoulders shook. No sound at first. Just silent grief, the kind that comes from recognizing you've become everything your mother feared and loved you enough to protect others from. I sat watching him cry. I didn't reach across the space between our chairs, didn't offer comfort or condemnation. Forgiveness wasn't mine to give yet. Maybe it never would be. My son cried in silence, and for the first time in years, I didn't make him stop. When the tears finally stopped, Alonzo wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. When your son's tears dry, and he asks you to save him from consequences, do you call that love or enabling? Can you withdraw it? He asked quietly. The APS report. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you gave me permission. I'd been waiting for this question since he'd knocked on my door. No, I said. Alonzo's face crumpled. Dad, please, I'm your son. Yes, I said. And you forged my signature 4 times. You left me in the desert to die in 110-degree heat. Those aren't misunderstandings. That's federal crime. So you want me in prison? His voice broke on the last word. You want your own son behind bars. I want you to face what you did, I said carefully. I won't lie to investigators. I won't withdraw a truthful report. But I also won't ask for the maximum sentence. I'll tell the DA exactly what happened and let the justice system do what it's designed to do. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You committed crimes, I continued. Real crimes with real victims. Me. Nayeli in a different way. The creditors you defrauded. You have to face consequences. Not because I want revenge, but because that's how society works. That's respect for law. And then what? Alonzo asked. After I face consequences, after I serve whatever time they give me, I thought about that for a long moment. Yeah, then maybe we rebuild, I said. From scratch. Not father and son picking up where we left off. Two people who share blood learning to know each other again. If you want that, you teach your children that consequences matter. But when consequences arrive, will you stand aside and let them learn? I don't know if I want that, Alonzo said honestly. I don't know what I want anymore. That's okay, I said. You have time to figure it out. He stood slowly like an old man despite being 40. I should go. I walked him to the door. He paused on the threshold looking back at me. Mom really knew, he said. Not a question. Just a statement he was still trying to process. So she really knew, I confirmed. And she loved you enough to let you fail. He nodded once and walked to his car. I watched him drive away, wondering if that was the last time I'd see him as a free man. 2 weeks passed. December deepened into the kind of winter Tucson does well. Clear blue skies, temperatures in the 60s, perfect weather for thinking. Thornton called on a Tuesday afternoon. FBI's formally investigating, he said, without preamble. 3 forged signatures. Elder abandonment. Your son's defense attorney is negotiating a plea deal. What kind of deal? I asked. Admission of guilt on reduced charges. Probably 18 to 36 months federal prison restitution payments, probation after release. He'd avoid trial, avoid the maximum sentences. Has he been arrested? Not yet, Thornton said. He's cooperating fully. Turned over documents admitted to everything providing timeline of fraud. His lawyer says he's not fighting it. I sat with that information for a moment. My son, who'd spent months planning fraud, who'd left me to die rather than face consequences, was now cooperating fully with federal investigators. Then he's doing his first right thing in 8 months, I said. Thornton was quiet for a beat. The DA will want a victim impact statement from you. For sentencing, you can request maximum penalties or support the plea deal. Your choice. What do you think I should do? I asked. That's not my decision, Thornton said. But I'll tell you this, your son is facing real prison time either way. The question is whether you want to push for 7 years or accept 18 months with genuine remorse. Justice isn't watching your son suffer. It's watching him finally choose accountability over escape. I'll support the plea deal, I said. If he's genuinely cooperating, if he's accepting responsibility. He is, Thornton confirmed. His lawyer showed me the cooperation agreement. Your son is giving them everything. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house thinking about what cooperation meant. Alonzo was admitting to crimes, accepting prison time, helping investigators build their case. Not because it would save him, it wouldn't, but because it was the right thing to do. Maybe Zelda's lesson had finally landed. 7 years late, but landed. I walked to my kitchen and looked at the table. Set for 1. Zelda's chair empty. The space where Alonzo used to sit when he was 12 learning about electrical resistance and Ohm's law empty. Thanksgiving had passed 3 weeks ago. I'd spent it alone for the first time in 40 years. No Zelda's turkey. No family filling the house with noise and laughter and the chaos of belonging. Just me, a simple dinner and silence. I'd expected it to feel lonely, sad, a reminder of everything I'd lost. But instead I'd felt peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you did the right thing even when it cost you everything. The kind that settles in your bones and stays. My son was cooperating with federal investigators. My daughter-in-law had left with nothing. My house was quiet. Zelda was gone. The family I'd built over 40 years had collapsed. But I had truth. I had integrity. I had the knowledge that when my son had tried to destroy me, I'd survived. I'd reported crimes. I'd protected assets Zelda and I had built together. I'd set boundaries. I hung up the phone and walked to the kitchen table set for one. First Thanksgiving in 40 years, eating's alone but feeling true peace. That peace carried me through December to Thornton's office in the third week, where decisions became permanent. The office smelled like old law books and finality, the scent of choices that can't be undone. Thornton had the documents already prepared, thick legal paper with tabs marking signature lines. Tamara sat beside me, her forensic accountant precision evident in how she reviewed every clause before I signed anything. "This is it," Thornton said, turning the first page toward me. "The Zelda Cox Electrical Engineering Scholarship Fund. Full endowment of $3.2 million in solar energy stock. Full ride scholarships for Arizona students pursuing sustainable energy degrees." I looked at the words. My wife's name. The fortune we'd built in silence. The field our son had mocked for 15 years while I quietly invested. "She knew 7 years ago this is what our money should do," I said. "Not enable our son. Empower strangers' children." Tamara's hand was shaking slightly as she witnessed my signature. "Grandma would be proud, Bernard," she said, her voice breaking. "So proud." The scholarship had specific criteria, Thornton explained as I signed page after page. Arizona residents only. Focus on sustainable energy and electrical engineering. Preference for first-generation college students. Students who'd had to work for everything they had. Students like I'd been, like Zelda had been. Not like Alonzo, who'd been handed opportunities and squandered them. "The remainder," Thornton asked, pointing to the next section. "Split between Tamara and the Arizona Electrical Workers Benevolent Fund," I said. "For retired electricians who need help. Your son isn't mentioned," Thornton noted. "Not a question, just confirmation." "I per Zelda's wish from 7 years ago," I said. She saw what was coming long before I did. A will isn't about death. It's the last instruction manual you leave for people who loved you enough to read it. We finished the signing in silence. Thornton witnessed, Tamara witnessed, the notary stamped everything official. My life's work formalized into legal language that would outlive me. I walked out of that office lighter somehow, like I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying since Zelda died. Christmas morning came quiet and cold. Well, cold for Tucson. Maybe 50 degrees at dawn. I made a coffee and stood on my front porch, watching the sun rise over the Catalina Mountains, painting them pink and gold. That's when I saw it. An envelope wedged in my doorframe, no stamp. Hand-delivered. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Alonzo's. The same handwriting I'd seen on forged documents, now on an envelope addressed simply Dad. I took it inside, sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten on lined paper, the kind you buy at drugstores. Not expensive stationery, just honest paper for honest words. It began. "I pled guilty yesterday. Not because my lawyer said to, though he did. Because it's true. I did those things. All of them. The signatures, the fraud, the abandonment. I did that to you." My hands were steady as I read. "Mio, when you told me Mom knew about the money, about how I'd been changing, that broke something I didn't know could break. Not anger, shame, real shame. Not of getting caught or facing consequences. Shame of who I became." I could see him writing this probably late at night, probably alone in whatever apartment he was staying in now that Nayeli had left. I remember the day you taught me circuit diagrams. I was 12. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours while you explained Ohm's law and series circuits and parallel circuits. You were so patient. You never got frustrated even when I didn't understand. I remembered that day. Of course I remembered. I don't know if we'll ever have that again, he wrote. I don't know if you can forgive what I did. I don't even know if I deserve to ask, but I needed you to know that I remember. I remember who you were, and I'm starting to remember who I used to be before I forgot. The letter was signed simply, Your son Alonzo. I sat holding those 3 pages for a long time. This wasn't manipulation, wasn't a scheme to reduce his sentence or win sympathy. This was genuine remorse, the kind that comes from seeing yourself clearly for the first time and hating what you see. Shame of self, not circumstances. That was growth, real growth. Forgiveness isn't deciding your son deserves another chance. It's releasing the need to decide at all. I didn't know if I forgave him. I didn't know if I ever would. But I also didn't need to know. The question itself felt less important than it had a month ago. My son had committed crimes. He would serve time in federal prison. That was justice, and justice mattered. But my son had also been raised by parents who loved him, taught him right from wrong, and gave him every opportunity to become someone good. Somewhere along the way, he'd chosen a different path. And now he was choosing to turn around. I couldn't control whether that turn was genuine or lasting. I couldn't decide if it was enough. All I could do was acknowledge it happened and let the rest unfold as it would. I refolded the letter carefully and walked to the living room mantel. Zelda's Bible sat there, the one she'd read every morning with her coffee. I placed Alonzo's letter inside next to our wedding photo, next to a framed drawing Alonzo had made when he was 8. A circuit diagram for a simple light switch, carefully labeled in crayon. I didn't know if we'd ever sit together again, building something new from these ruins. Didn't know if reconciliation was possible or even desirable. Don't know if we'll sit together again, but I no longer found that question important. What mattered was that I'd told the truth, protected what Zelda and I built, set boundaries, let consequences happen. And now I could let go. Letting go of that question felt like setting down luggage I'd been carrying for months. 3 days later, the blue RV pulled into my driveway on December 28th, like a promise kept. Some people circle back, some people stay. Thaddeus and Marie Greer stepped out with the easy comfort of people who'd learned to travel light and make friends wherever they stopped. They'd been continuing their cross-country journey, they explained, but wanted to check in before heading east for the winter. Tamara was already at my house, having brought cookies she'd baked for the occasion. We sat in my living room, drinking tea from mismatched mugs, the afternoon sunlight slanting warm through the windows. "Hon, never thought we'd get mixed up in family drama just hitting the road," Thaddeus said with a gentle smile. "But we'd do it again in a heartbeat." "You saved my life," I said simply. "You were saving yourself," Marie corrected. "We just provided the ride." Thaddeus set down his mug. "We should tell you. We gave statements to the FBI. Detailed testimony about the timeline, your condition, when we found you, everything we witnessed. I hadn't known that. The DA had mentioned witnesses, but I'd assumed it was just the initial sheriff's report." "You didn't have to do that," I said. "Yes, we did," Marie said firmly. "What your son did was criminal. We saw the aftermath. We're not going to pretend we didn't." They'd chosen involvement over neutrality. Strangers who could have driven past, could have dropped me at a hospital and disappeared, had instead stayed to ensure justice happened. "Thank you," I said. The words felt inadequate but sincere. Marie reached across and squeezed my hand. "You taught us something, Bernard. Blood family and chosen family aren't opposites. Sometimes one becomes the other. Family isn't the people who share your name. It's the people who stop their RV when yours breaks down." We talked for 2 hours. Not about the abandonment or the trial or any of it. Just about travel, about the places they'd seen, about Tamara's work, about Zelda's scholarship fund. Normal conversation between people who'd been through something abnormal together. When they stood to leave, Marie hugged me at the door. "See you somewhere down the road," I said. "That's not goodbye," she replied with a smile. "That's a plan." I watched their blue RV pull away, knowing I probably would see them again somewhere. The desert Southwest isn't that big and travelers tend to cross paths. 2 days later, on New Year's Eve, I stood in my garage looking at the motorhome that had been returned to me after the legal proceedings. It sat there like a question I hadn't decided to answer yet. Tamara found me there at 3 in the afternoon. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Thinking about taking a trip," I said. "After everything settles. After the scholarship ceremony." "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Figure I'll drive and see what needs seeing." I started inspecting the electrical systems. Not because I had to. Not because someone had sabotaged them. Because I wanted to know they worked. Because I wanted to understand every wire, every connection, every circuit in this vehicle before I drove it anywhere. "Can I come with you?" Tamara asked quietly. I looked up from the battery terminals. "That's why I'm asking about the trip in front of you. Not alone this time, together." She smiled, and we spent the next few hours going through every system. I showed her how to check fluid levels, how to test the electrical connections, how to verify the solar panels I'd had installed years ago were still functioning. Checking circuits because I wanted to, not because someone demanded it. That was freedom. Every wire I reconnected wasn't fixing the motorhome. It was reconnecting to the man who used to build things for joy, not duty. "You know this is different from what happened before, right?" Tamara said as we worked. "This is your choice, your timeline, your journey." "I know," I said, and I did know. The last time I'd stepped into this motorhome, it had been at my son's invitation, walking into a trap I'd sensed, but hoped wasn't real. This time I was preparing it myself for a trip I wanted to take with someone I trusted. Reclamation, not escape. The first major decision I'd made in a year entirely for myself, not in response to betrayal or legal proceedings or anyone else's agenda. "Where should we go first?" Tamara asked. "Maybe north," I said. "See the Grand Canyon in January. Snow on the rim. Then wherever feels right. No schedule." "No schedule," I confirmed. "Just maps and possibility." We finished the inspection as the sun set. Everything worked. Every system functional. Every connection solid. I'd built my career on making sure electricity flowed where it needed to go, and this motorhome was no different. Tamara brought her bag from her car. Already packed, I noticed. She'd planned to come along before I'd even asked. Smart woman like her grandmother. We spread maps across the passenger seat. Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado? Nowhere specific and everywhere possible. I locked the garage at 11:47 on New Year's Eve. The motorhome sat ready. Tamara's belongings stowed. My life simplified to what fit in a vehicle designed for movement. In my bed that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not peace exactly. I'd found that already. Not closure. Some things don't close. Just completion. A chapter ending not with resolution but with readiness for whatever came next. That night, I had the deepest sleep in years. No dreams. No worries. Just good silence. And in the morning, a new year would begin with new roads ahead. Morning came with the new year, and we drove northeast into the desert I'd nearly died in. The motorhome rolled past mile marker 47, heading toward the winter sunrise, and I asked Tamara to pull over at the exact spot where everything had ended 8 months ago. "Stop here," I said. "This is the spot." Tamara looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "But this time I'm ready." She pulled onto the shoulder the same red dirt road where Alonzo had driven away. I stepped out into the January morning with a water bottle in my hand, my phone fully charged in my pocket, and someone who cared about me standing beside me. Everything different. Everything reversed. I walked to where I'd stood watching the motorhome disappear. The landscape looked the same. Saguaro cacti stretching their arms toward cloudless sky, creosote bushes scattered across rocky soil mountains, rising purple in the distance. But the place held no power over me now. I wasn't a victim returning to the scene. I was a man acknowledging transformation. She would have liked this place. I said, looking at the horizon where the sun was just starting to paint the sky, copper and gold. Zelda, the silence, the sunrise, the honesty of it. It's beautiful when you're not dying in it, Tamara said quietly. Everything's beautiful when you're not dying in it. I agreed. We stood there for a few minutes, just breathing. The desert air smelled clean and sharp, that particular scent of creosote and dust that means Arizona winter. I'd spent my whole life in this state, knew its rhythms, its seasons, its dangerous beauty. Ready to go? Tamara asked. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. We drove to an RV park near Ajo, the same town where Thaddeus and Marie had taken me to file the police report. Different context now. Different purpose. We were just travelers stopping for the night, not victims seeking justice. At midnight on New Year's Day, my phone buzzed with a text message. Alonzo's name on the screen. I almost didn't open it. Almost set the phone down and went to sleep. But curiosity won. Happy New Year. I know you're on the road. Don't have to reply. Just want you to know I'm trying. I read it 3 times. Sitting in the dark motorhome, Tamara asleep in the back bedroom, desert stars visible through the windshield. I held my phone and thought about what trying meant. When do you stop being the person betrayed and become simply the person who survived? I didn't know the answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe you were always both. The person it happened to and the person who kept living afterward. 4 words. That's all I had for 40 years of fatherhood, 8 months of betrayal, and whatever future might or might not exist. I typed, I know, and sent it. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not a promise of anything except acknowledgement that I'd received his message and understood what he was saying. I allowed myself to believe just for a moment that maybe someday we'd sit across from each other again and talk about circuit diagrams. Maybe. Someday. No guarantees. That was enough. The next morning, Tamara made coffee in the motorhome's small kitchen. We sat outside in folding chairs watching the sun rise over the Sonoran desert, warming our hands on cheap plastic travel mugs. Do you regret it? Tamara asked. Living simple when you could have had crystal chandeliers. I thought about that question. Really thought about it. I never regretted what I built, I said finally. Just regretted waiting for others to see its value. My calloused hands wrapped around the plastic mug, feeling its warmth seep through. 38 years of electrical work. 38 years of climbing poles, stripping wire, troubleshooting circuits, building systems that brought light to people's homes. And these hands, I said, holding them up. 38 years they held everything together, fixed what was broken, built what was needed. Now they hold this coffee cup. I looked at Tamara. That's enough. Wealth isn't what gleams under chandeliers. It's what your calloused hands built, loved, and let go when necessary. To new roads, Tamara asked, raising her plastic mug. To new roads, I agreed. We clinked our ridiculous cups together under the desert sunrise, a toast to everything that actually mattered. Not mansions or luxury or crystal chandeliers. Not even justice, though justice had its place. What mattered was this: I'd survived. I'd told the truth. I'd protected what Zelda and I built together. I'd let my son face consequences while leaving a door open for genuine change. I'd found chosen family and strangers who stopped their RV. I'd created a legacy that would help kids I'd never meet get educations they deserved. I'd lived simply and honestly, and built things with my own hands. And at the end of it all, I was sitting in the desert, with someone who cared, drinking bad coffee from a cheap cup, watching sunrise paint the sky the same copper and gold as the electrical wire I'd spent a lifetime bending into light for others. Tamara's cup touched mine with a small clink, that plastic-on-plastic sound that's nothing like crystal but somehow perfect. The sunrise painted the Sonoran sky in bands of copper and gold, the same colors as wire I'd spent my life working with, the same colors as the solar panels generating electricity across Arizona panels I'd helped install years ago when nobody wanted them, investments that became millions. I'd built a life with calloused hands and quiet choices. No crystal chandeliers, no mansions, no luxury cars or designer clothes or any of the things my son had chased and lost. Just this: coffee at sunrise with someone who mattered, Zelda's legacy secured, truth told, consequences faced, new roads ahead, and there was no crystal chandelier in sight, just calloused hands holding coffee under a desert sunrise. And to you listening to my story, remember, this betrayal doesn't have to define you. How you respond to it does. For years I trusted without questioning. I gave without boundaries. I believed that unconditional love meant accepting any treatment from family. Don't make my mistake. Family justice isn't about revenge, it's about standing up when you've been knocked down. I should have set boundaries earlier, should have recognized the warning signs. But sometimes we learn the hardest lessons in the harshest places. What I've learned is that real family justice comes from protecting yourself and others who might face the same harm. These dad's revenge stories, you hear, mine included, they're not about destroying someone. They're about reclaiming your dignity. When Alonzo left me in that desert, I could have let bitterness consume me. Instead, I chose accountability. I believe God put me through this trial to teach me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting consequences. The legal system exists for a reason. Elder abuse is a crime, and speaking up isn't vindictive, it's necessary. That's the lesson I hope you take from these dad's revenge stories. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in my situation? Do you think seeking family justice through the law was the right choice? If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you enjoy dad's revenge stories like mine, subscribe to Wise Revenge for more true stories about standing up for yourself. Thank you for staying until the very end. This story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes, but the message about accountability and self-worth is real.